Okay, awesome. Thank you. Dr. Haas introduced me, so I won't do it again, but my name is Jordan, and I am a very proud alumni of the class of 2013 of Creighton. So let's talk about data privacy. Data is super valuable in our economy. It is used to develop products and services and ultimately shape our society in ways that we may or may not agree with. So if you've ever considered boycotting a company over bad behavior or supporting a business you did know and trust, then it's also relevant and interesting to know who collects our data, how they use it, and especially how they're profiting from it. So first things first, what is data? Anything we post or react to on social media, online purchases, things we click on, website visits, searches, etc., etc., etc. Device data such as calls and locations on our cell phones, surveys and forms we fill out, public records, maybe also DNA, whether or not it's publicly available, it could be data. But then also information that is inferred about us based on these observed behaviors. And what that means is what groups of people are most similar to me, and what do they do, and what do they buy, and what do they click on, and what do they like. That can also be considered data. So I've made a purchase online, and this will look familiar to all of us. I bought something, so I might also buy something else. That's an example of predictive analytics and a type of inferred data. Another type of inferred data comes from a large retail company, and a statistician at this company was approached by his marketing colleagues who said, if we wanted to figure out if a customer is pregnant, even if she didn't want us to know that, can you do that? It turns out they could, and they sent coupons for diapers to a teenage girl whose father didn't know. Maybe you've heard this story. Her father didn't know she was pregnant, and she received these coupons. And that was a hurtful example of not only inference. And the difference between these two examples, the first one is people who bought this also bought that. The second one is people who bought certain things over a certain period of time belong to this group, and I will market to them based on that. So that brings us to the question of what is privacy. I'll define it, there's a lot of ways to define it, but for now, for today, I will say that basically information I don't want others to know is not known. And along with that, I want to decide what and who knows what information about me. And in conversations about data privacy, there's a sentiment that often comes up that, well, I don't have anything to hide, so I don't need to worry about this. But I would argue that just because I don't have anything to hide doesn't mean that my life should be an open book to companies who have sophisticated data analysis algorithms. And this gets tricky when it comes to inferred data, where I'm doing my part by not posting things that I want to keep private online, but they might still be inferred based on other behavior that I am doing online. So just visiting websites and things. So it's also this inferred data is also not only used for targeted advertising. Years ago, people saw their credit limit drop without notification, and it turned out that credit card companies had been doing analysis on which of their which of their credit card holders paid their bills on time, and comparing that with what are called merchant category codes. And merchant category codes can be used to give you double points on travel rewards. Cool. Another example of merchant category codes include things like secondhand stores, discount stores, gambling venues, massage parlors, and even counseling services. And then our credit card companies can use that data to perform risk management. And ouch, right? We do have in place Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which prohibits credit card discrimination based on several factors, race, gender, etc. It also prohibits creditors from even asking about marital status or plans to have children, but it does not say anything about what they might infer based on our transactions. So in 2009 and 10, there was a federal investigation into these practices and how they were affecting consumers. And the report, it was just an investigation. it concluded with a short page of recommendations. And the conclusion of the report first noted that only a small portion of credit card holders were affected. I don't find that all that comforting. The information tends to be general in nature, but again, general information could include things like using my credit card for counseling services, and generalizations in themselves can be harmful. They also noted creditors reported to the federal investigators that unfavorable public attention is already a deterrent from adopting these practices. So that's great, we can use that, but it certainly doesn't give us any guarantees. And the report concluded by saying potential costs should be weighed against possible benefits from restricting these practices. And what's at heart here is maybe a philosophical question of, should we balance innovation for credit card industries and retail companies with data privacy? Should we balance those things, or should we guarantee data privacy as a right and then innovate from that starting point? Another example of inference that is important is from usage-based automotive insurance. So you could opt in to share your speed over time, and they would use that to measure how much you use your car, and then charge you less if you drive less, and so on. The problem is that it was demonstrated that your speed over time can be used to infer your location over time by bringing in auxiliary data sources such as easily accessible traffic data, maps, speed limits. Not that companies are necessarily engaging this, but it is certainly possible. And this brings up two questions. If I opt in to share my speed data over time, does the company have the right to learn other information that I didn't consent to? And if I shared my speed over time data with the company for the purpose of measuring how much I use my car, do they have the right to use that data for a purpose that I didn't consent to? That's a good question. So data is out of control, and I mean that figuratively and literally. It is not in my power to decide who has access to my data and what they use it for, or to get it back after they have it. One of the ways that data is out of control is excessive permissions that we consent to. So I don't know if you can read this. It's a screenshot from a banking application that I could download, and it includes permission to access the microphone, Wi-Fi network information, and device ID and call information, including my number and who I'm calling, and when and how long. And so the microphone permission, and this is just the final three of the list that I scrolled down and chose to use as examples. The microphone permission could be used as an accessibility feature for people who have an easier time interacting with their applications with voice control rather than touch screen. So that's great, but it's certainly not the case for everyone. And I don't have very much discretion in which of these permissions I can opt in or out. It's like all or nothing. I can install the application, which is convenient because then I can deposit checks from home, or I can not install the application. The other two permissions, I don't actually know why a banking application would want my Wi-Fi information or my call records. This is something they might explain in a privacy policy, but no one reads those. So another way that our data is out of control is that just because you delete something doesn't mean that it's been erased. Companies can, instead of erasing your data, they can just tag it as deleted. So you won't see it anymore when you interact with that application, but they'll maintain a copy. That's not always the case, but it certainly could be. So it's also no longer feasible to opt out of all the companies who own our data because there are so many of them. And that brings us to the topic of data brokers. Data brokers collect data from multiple sources, and they use data matching techniques to package profiles of individuals, including very identifying information. These are not anonymized. Into marketing and risk mitigation and even people search products, which they then sell to financial institutions, insurance companies, the hospitality industry, cable and telecommunication companies, political campaigns, retail stores, government entities, and law enforcement agencies, and each other. And personal, individuals. So you can see how this gets out of control. It gets carried away. And data brokers are not necessarily evil. They are just capitalists taking advantage of little regulation and awareness. And so Joseph Turow makes the point that the majority of Americans consistently believe the words privacy policy mean that a company keeps your data private, when in fact that's not the case. And he argues that privacy policies should be instead called how we use your data, because sometimes if you happen to read a privacy policy, they might say, we will sell your data, we will share it with third parties. So, now what? Where does that leave us? I'm certainly not advocating that we throw away our computers and smash our cell phones and isolate ourselves. There are some things we can do, and society is starting to pay more attention. So changes in the air. One thing that's going on is privacy laws are starting to become more prevalent, especially in the European Union. There is a general data protection right regulation that includes data subject rights, which includes the right to be forgotten, which would take care of that issue of companies don't actually delete your data when you ask them to. There's also computer scientists like me who are improving data management technology. And this includes computer security experts trying to prevent data breaches on a large scale for companies who hire computer security experts. When data privacy is done well from a computer science perspective, it is possible to learn about an entire population and come up with interesting innovations based on that information without exposing individuals at all. Also, fine-grained control over who gets what data. I would love to see that as a consumer, I can say that this company may use my data for product development, but not marketing, or things like that. More fine-grained control that is essentially empowering individuals to control who gets their data and for what purpose. Along with this is reusable tools for privacy-first data management, because giant tech companies have the resources to change their infrastructure to comply with increasingly strict data laws. So then they can continue to get the value out of data, whereas smaller and more medium-sized companies, if they don't have computer science and technical experts to conform, then they lose out on some of the value that data actually does have. There's also the Tech Workers Coalition, and they highlight and organize tech workers who are putting pressure on companies from the inside, not only about data privacy, but more broadly social justice issues and technology. However, neither the data privacy laws will actualize, nor will the tools get built if individuals don't demand it. So my advice for all of us, including myself, is to organize around what we do want rather than fighting what we don't, at least as a starting point, because it is also important to find leverage points for change, including the unfavorable public attention that credit card companies admitted that they were responding to. So in almost every industry, there are companies trying to distinguish themselves by doing a radically good job of protecting data and respecting privacy, so we can support them by using their services, allowing them to learn from our data, and then slowly also moving away from companies who are more reckless with our data. And that will mean accepting some inconveniences along the way. But the first step for sure is to learn more and have these conversations. So thank you very much for listening to my talk.